So can you get away with not pulling a permit for your remodel? Today we're going to take a look at different scenarios where it may not be required to pull a permit and what those exemptions are. Keep in mind that if a permit is required for your particular repair, remodel, construction, you probably want to go ahead and do it. There's a lot of consequences that can come up later. It's very tempting to not pull a permit when it's required. You may think you'll get away with it. It's possible you will, but there's a lot of ways that repair work or that contracting work will be discovered later, and we'll talk about that as well. But first, we're going to talk about when is it not required. How can you get away with not pulling a permit? We're going to look at an example today from Lane County in Oregon, which is in the center of the Willamette Valley. This is one county's narrative and statutes for this particular subject of exemption from permits, but it's very representative of counties across Oregon, Pacific Northwest, and even most of the country have very similar types of exemptions that are available. So we're going to look at first their exemption from public permits or from building permits, land management. The following permit exemptions apply to residential projects only. Keep in mind, if you have a commercial property, a business property, government-owned property, none of these exemptions apply. Exemptions for commercial projects, they have those as well, but that's not what we're talking about. So, exemption from permits shall not be considered authorized for any work done in a manner in violations. What this means is, just because a permit is not required doesn't mean you can do work to non-standard specifications. You still have to do the work to proper building specs, right? It just means you don't have to do a permit. So here's a couple examples of work scopes that are exempt from permits, and then we'll talk about demolition, remodel, how to pull a permit, and what the application looks like. But let's take a look at what's exempt. So if it's a non-habitable one-story detached accessory structure, has to be 200 square feet or less and 10 feet or less in height. Okay? So if you're building a shed, a playhouse, remote structure, sometimes even like a man cave or she shed will apply to this exemption. Non-habitable, meaning you can't sleep in it, you're not using it for living space. Tool and storage shed, similar uses. Floor area not exceeding 200 feet. So 10 by 20, 12 by 12, 12 by 16 will fit into that category. Right? If you're building something like that, you do not have to pull a permit. They talk about fences. If the fence is less than 7 feet, and if it's wire or chain link, it can be 8 feet. Okay, except if it's going around a swimming pool, you got to get a permit. Why is that? Well, that's a safety item. Okay, retaining walls. If it's not supporting a building and do not retain material that could impact a building. So if you're building a retaining wall just to kind of do landscaping or for a flower bed or for a raised bed, you're fine. But if it's holding up a building or holding up material that could go into a building, not good. If you're putting in a water tank, if it's on grade and less than 5,000 gallons, you're good, as long as it's not too tall, right? It's not like a silo. Sidewalks, driveways, that kind of thing, painting, tiling, cabinets, interior trim work, that kind of thing, you're good to go. Prefab swimming pools, right? So like an above ground pool, there's some exemptions to that. Swings, playground equipment, makes sense, right? Patio and porch covers, again, 200 square feet, and not supported by an exterior building wall. This is important. If you have a porch or deck next to your house and you're building a cover over it, and that can have some walls around it too, you're going to be okay as long as it's less than the specified square feet. In this county, it's 200. But you can't attach it to the house. You can't put a ledger board and start holding up that support to the house. Window awnings, won't get too much into that. That's not a big deal for most people. Retrofitted insulation, again, retrofitted. You're not putting in new insulation in the house. You're adding insulation or replacing insulation. Siding, as long as it's not part of the fire protection. Porches and decks. Here's an important thing. A lot of people like to build a deck or a porch, as long as it's not more than 30 inches above grade. The reason they do that is because if you build a deck higher, it's a safety item. If it's not built properly and collapses, somebody's going to get hurt. They figure if it's less than 30 inches, you're not going to get that hurt, right? And they have to measure it horizontally if it's on a slope. Gutters and downspouts, you're fine. Door and window replacements, as long as there's no structural member. So you can take out a door frame, window frame, and put it in. As long as you're not changing any of the headers, the king studs, the jack studs, you're keeping the same rough opening of the window. If you can fix your roof, as long as you're not doing 30% of the roof for the weight. Storm windows, frame covered non-habitable buildings, as long as it's composed of rigid framework. What that means is kind of like an enclosure for your tractor or a temporary carport, right? One of those things with the tubes and you put the fabric over the top. Okay, flagpoles, antenna, as long as it doesn't go higher than 25 feet. So here you go. What about electrical? Electrical work are exempt. Minor electrical work, including replacement of lamps. And we'll talk about owner occupied as well. This is another one that you're allowed to do. Homeowners electrical permit, where you can do some exemptions and you follow this flow chart for electrical. Mechanical permits. If you want to do a clothes dryer, stove, ventilation, cooling unit. When it says portable, that means it's not hardwired. It just plugs in. Right? Self-contained refrigerator, same thing. You have a fridge, you have a freezer that it plugs in. Self-contained. The most important thing about appliances is if it's hardwired or hooks up to propane or natural give or hooks up to plumbing, you need a permit. Right? And again, this whole thing is not designed to give you legal advice or, give you final approval for a permit or exemptions. It's to give you an idea of what you can and can't do. What about plumbing? You can stop leaks. You can snake a drain. You can clear out pipes. You just can't break open the plumbing system. Right? So that's the basic idea behind it. What happens as far as getting a permit? Well, let's do this. Let's jump to this exemption for electrical. This is a good logic flow chart for electrical, and this is very similar to most of the country. Homeowners permit purchase guide. Start here. Pick all the statements that apply to you. If you own the property, no, stop. Hire an electrical contractor. This is where you can do your own permit, right? If it will be done by you or your immediate family, yes, keep going. No, you got to hire an electrical contractor. If you're selling the property, yes, you have to hire a electrical contractor. You can't do it yourself. If you're wiring a new home, yes, well, then you have to do something else. We're going to follow this down to find out if you can get your own permit. If you're wiring more than 50% of the home, nope, you don't have to call an electrician. I'm repairing or replacing a service or feeder in my home. No, yes, well, then you have to get a permit, right? If you're getting the drop to your house from an electrical company. If you're adding a branch service, yes. I'm adding a branch circuit in less than 50% of the house. No, keep going. I want to reconnect an existing service, meaning that if you had your service disconnected by the power company to do some work, if you're putting it back on, you have to get a permit. I'm installing a temporary construction service. Yes, you have to get a permit, right? If you follow this all down, water pump, low voltage, like for thermostat or speakers, you can do your own permit, right? Mobile home's another one. So a lot of cities, counties will give you this breakdown of what you can and can't do on your own as a homeowner. In addition to that, if you are doing your own work, you can exempt from responsibility from CCB. That's the licensing board in Oregon. If you own and reside in the house, you can exempt yourself from liability. If you're doing it yourself, you have to certify, I am performing work on a property I own that I reside in. I will be my own general contractor. And if I change my mind to hire a GC, I will contact the GC to get liability. If I hire subcontractors, I will hire only subcontractors licensed with the CCB. So there's a way you can exempt from liability for some of this. Here's what a typical permit looks like. You have to do the job site location, description of work, the property owner. If you're a contractor, put your information, scope of work, new, remodel, demo, residential, commercial, government, what the value of the work is, and what are the fees. And it gives you a breakdown of the fees on the instruction page. Here's some important information for doing demo work. This comes up a lot when you're looking to get rid of demolition material. If you bring it to the landfill, they're going to ask you, is this house built before 1978? If it was, there could be lead-based paint. So if you remove or modify any painted surfaces, you tear out sheetrock, take out moldings, right? Take out windows. It might have lead-based paint and they might not let you put it. Sometimes you're also going to be on the lookout for asbestos were used on older homes. So if you're doing demo, you want to make sure you understand what the rules are, and if you're getting a permit, you want to know where you're going to put your debris. You can't just bring it to any landfill because they're going to ask you where it came from, and you're going to have to sign a form. And if they find materials in what you dropped off later, they can charge you a lot of money. So what can you do without a building permit? We already talked about that, residential work exemption. When do I need a building permit? Adding a room. If you're building, demolishing, or moving a carport or shed more than 200 square feet. So even if you demolish something that's bigger than 200 square feet, you need a permit. If you're finishing an unfinished space, a garage, an attic, a basement, finishing it out, you need a permit. If you're cutting a new window opening, remember the header and the king studs and jack studs, that's going to be affected by widening an opening. If you're moving or adding walls, you need a permit. Part of the reason is to make sure you're not removing any load-bearing walls or putting up a new wall in the wrong way. If you're applying roofing, when taking out the old roofing, building a stairway. Stairway is an important structural item that people can get hurt on. Building a retaining wall more than 4 feet high, building a deck more than 30 inches. We talked about that. Also, if you do excavation, if you move more than 50 cubic yards of earth, you have to get a permit. Well, 50 cubic yards is not really that much, right? It's like 4 yards squared. It's not that much. So keep in mind that you have to, or cubed, you have to make sure that you're not moving too much dirt. Can you draw your own construction plans? Yes, you can, but you have to build them to scale, and you can actually hand draw them. They give you some examples of how to draw a construction plan, such as this, but it doesn't have to be that precise. A lot of the work, especially if it's minor work, can be done hand-drawn. Tells you what it has to have to scale, the foundation, the floor plans, roof and framing. If it's an interior wall, it may not need as much. And what about plumbing? Plumbing is important. If you are breaking open the plumbing or drain or water system any opening of the pipes, including vents, you're going to need a permit, which will probably need to go through a licensed plumber. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about how the permit process works. How could a non-permitted job become an issue for you? If you put on an addition or a outbuilding that's bigger than 200 feet, or maybe you add an interior wall, if you go to sell your house later and the appraiser comes in and looks at something that obviously wasn't there the last time the house was sold or the last time the house was done for tax assessment, they're going to look and see if there's a permit. And if there's no permit for that on file, they're going to make a note in the appraisal report that says, looks like there's an unpermitted wall. Looks like there's an unpermitted outbuilding. It looks like there was a repair to the plumbing system that wasn't permitted. It looks like the water heater is newer than the last permit, or the electrical box. And that could be a problem for selling the house. Many lenders will not lend to a buyer if there's unpermitted work on the property, which means that your buyer for your house might not be able to buy your house if they find unpermitted work. And it's very difficult to go back later and get a permit then because they can't see all the work at the various stages. When a permit is inspected, there's several different inspection stages that are done to look at the job during different timelines. When it's first started, when the wall's roughed in, if there's electrical at different points of it before the sheetrock goes on. So you want to make sure that you get your permits if you're going to need them. Even if you think you're going to live in your house forever, there could be times when you come up and you might want to refinance your house. You may want to take a home equity loan. And we've seen appraiser reports come in that have discovered non-permitted work that have become an issue financially. The other thing that can happen is if there's any evidence of the work on the outside of the house, then county tax assessors do photos of homes from the air and from the sides on a regular basis. If they discover a larger footprint or something different, they can come look at it, and if they look at it for valuation, they charge you more taxes. But if they find it's an unpermitted work, they can create some bureaucratic headaches for you. So keep in mind there's a lot of exemptions from building permits, but if you do need one, you want to think very carefully about not getting one. It's a pain in the neck. Make sure if you're getting a contractor to do this, that your contractor actually gets the permits on their behalf, because you want them to be documented on record for doing it. Because permits are a very important part of making sure that the work not only is done right, but is done in a way that supports the ongoing value of your property.